Welcome to Trailblazers and Titans with your host, Dr. Keith Haney. Trailblazers and Titans is your go-to podcast for insights, inspiration, and actionable advice from the world's most successful entrepreneurs and leaders. Each episode features in-depth interviews with industry pioneers, innovative thinkers, and business moguls who share their journeys, challenges, and strategies for success. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned leader, or someone looking to make a significant impact, this podcast provides the tools and motivation to blaze your trail and become a titan in your field. Tune in to learn, grow, and transform your vision into reality.
My guest today is Andrew Winkler. He started college at 15 and taught his first course at 16. Going on to become a professor at Stanford and Columbia, he started a company selling bomber jackets to dogs, and has started several companies inventing a system for literacy, for security, for secure data and data storage, and now finding ways to make good use of carbon pulling from the air. He's also worked with several tech startups and now living on those investments. He's also writing books on how personality determines what will make us feel loved and unloved, and how to understand what those who care about most need from us, and on how Newton came up with his ideas, and on how the facets of mathematics can be seen to emerge on a single central data. We welcome Andrew to the podcast. Well, Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today, my friend?
Great to be here. Doing great. Thanks. Appreciate your having me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to having the conversation. I love to ask my guests this question, though. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And what came to mind for me thinking about that is I ran across once a piece of advice, which is that only if you're unafraid of truth can you find it.
Oh, I like that.
And I found that to be really true over the course of my life.
And where'd you hear that?
Very interesting places. Yeah, actually, it was a church had put together a kind of a missionary outreach film, and that was one of the things that they said in the film. And I saw it as a little kid, and it's just stuck with me ever since.
Wow, interesting. Well, you have led a quite accomplished life, and I'm always curious of people like yourself. Who are some people in your life who served as an inspiration for you, or someone served as a mentor on your journey?
I had some really awesome mentors. The first that sort of comes to mind is Helaman Ferguson, who is a mathematician, and I was quite young when I started college, and he kind of took me under wing and has been a great friend all over the years and to this day. Peter Lax was my thesis advisor when I was getting my PhD, and he and Peter Sarnak were both really very interesting figures in terms of my mathematical education. Henry McKean comes to mind too. He also had a really exhilarating style in terms of the way he thought about things and the way he approached things. And his lecture style was described as a bat out of hell, and but I found that stimulating and interesting and engaging rather than intimidating. So
some people,
those were
some might be taken back by that. Yes.
Yeah, different strokes, right?
Different strokes for different folks. I didn't like my lectures coming at me full bore like that. I kind of like to ease into a little bit.
Well, it's funny. I had another professor. It's kind of a funny story because from his lecturing style, I thought, man, this guy's an idiot. And then he got a job as a permanent member at the Institute for Advanced Study, which is like, the most prestigious job there is in the scientific world. And then I realized it wasn't that he was an idiot, it's that he thought we were idiots.
Oh. So. There you go. When genius is lost on to dumb, right?
Yeah. So anyway.
So you mentioned kind of in your opening there that you started college young. You didn't tell us exactly how young. You started college at 15 and taught your first class at 16. What motivated you to
Yeah,
pursue
that's
this
right.
accelerated academic path? I mean, most of us at 15 are just like skateboarding, and you're in college and you're teaching class at 16.
Yeah, it was unusual, definitely. I grew up in Maryland, and there was a guy named Julian Stanley who was a professor in the psychology department there, and he undertook what he called a study of. There are actually two studies he did: a study of mathematically precocious youth and a study of verbally precocious youth. And what he did is he gave a bunch of sixth and seventh graders the SATs, and then selected his study group from among those who performed um, uh, uncommonly well for that age on that test. And one of the sort of interventions he was really in favor of was skipping grades. And so I was in that program in sixth grade and seventh grade. And when it got time for eighth grade, I knew my dad was retiring, and I knew my family was going to be moving away. And so I was like, I'm losing all my friends regardless. So now is as good a time as any if I'm ever going to skip a grade to do it. And so I did. I was bored out of my mind. I had some great teachers, but they weren't teaching to me; they were teaching to the class, and I was just, it was painful for me. I was so bored, and so I thought, well, I'll skip into high school, which ninth grade was in that part of Maryland at the time, and then I'll be taking high school classes, and those will be stimulating and exciting. Steep learning curve ahead, but anyway, that got me into high school, and then again, it was like frying pan into the fire, because now, not only was I bored, but I was thinking I wasn't going to be, so it was sort of an insult to injury kind of situation.
Right.
So after a semester, I transferred into a different high school that was an open space school, which meant you could do everything at your own pace. And that was just heaven for me, because, I got to explore whatever I wanted to, and go as fast as I wanted. And the upshot of that was that by the time I finished, I was a junior in high school, because I'd gotten that many credits. So when my dad did retire and the family moved, I had gone from being what would have been a ninth grader to being a junior in high school. And so I took a bunch of AP classes, and at the end of that year, I just started college and
Wow.
never looked back.
I'm curious, for someone that young on a college campus setting, what were some of the challenges you faced? Because you're around people who are 9, 10 years older than you. What challenges did you discover kind of going from that, high school to college right away?
Well, I kind of didn't, in a way. I mean,
Okay.
I sort of got taken on as a bit of a mascot. The older kids, found me a novelty, and I was young enough that it didn't really bother them, that I was excelling the way I was. And so, I was kind of their pet, I guess. The one odd thing about it is that I have a January birthday, so I was always one of the older kids, in my class when I was younger. So I always thought of myself as tall, and then I, skipped into college, and all of a sudden I wasn't tall, but it didn't really, phase me, because I really didn't expect to be as tall as these, people 5 years older than me, or, whatever. And then, but so it was only when I, got old enough that I was back, in sort of my age group again, in some ways, that it was like, wait a minute, what happened here? All of a sudden I was just average height.
Right.
So that was one of the kind of weirder adjustment situations for me, I think.
Did you find college classes, at least on your level, not above you, but just kind of right when you're kind of your sweet spot?
So actually, things started to catch up with me even in my senior year of high school. I took a calculus class, And that was the first class that I actually had to study for. I couldn't just kind of waltz in and take the test, and so that was a bit of a wake up call for me. And so I developed some study habits then, which helped me when I got into college, because I definitely couldn't just continue skating through. But I also tended to take like really heavy loads. At this point, I had kind of a pathological fear of boredom, so I would take on way too much, just out of fear that I'd end up bored otherwise.
Which kind of
So,
explains, as I look at the many hats you wear: professor, entrepreneur, author, comedian. How do you navigate all these things? I know you worry about being bored, but how do you not overload yourself with all these different hats you wear?
well, I do overload myself.
Okay.
I mean, it's it. Like right now, I'm trying to finish 3 books, and
At the same time?
at the same time.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
One of them is largely finished. One of them I've gotten a first draft through, but needs a lot more work. Another one I'm maybe halfway through. And I mentioned my thesis advisor, Peter Lax. One of his exasperated remarks to me was, "Everything interests you." And so the flip side is, that's a source of enormous enjoyment to me. So I you know I in I certainly could have had a more sort of relaxed, conventional life, but I wouldn't have had nearly as much fun and enjoyment. So I think it's a decent trade-off.
I don't feel so bad because I'm actually working on 2 books simultaneously myself. So I thought I was just me who was crazy. But
And what are those about?
well, I just finished my doctoral thesis, and so I'm turning
Oh, wow.
the
Congratulations.
thesis into. Oh, thank you. I'm turning the thesis into a novel, because mine was on helping churches who were navigate the change process, and
Okay.
I thought just doing that into a book, an academic book, would be boring. It'd be okay for me, but the rest of the audience would be bored still. So I thought if I turned it into a novel of kind of the whole change process through a fictional character and a fictional
Interesting.
church, it might be more interesting. So, and the other one is, what would it be like if theologians of the past were sitting down around coffee today talking about modern issues? How would they handle it based on their own individual experiences? So,
Right. Yeah. Religion has a real challenge because the world changes, so they have
yes,
to change. But their value proposition is eternal things, and so you have to maintain the illusion of not changing while you must change,
right.
and that's a really hard balance.
And because you were stuck in a time frame, a time period. The world
Hmm.
around you is very different now. How would someone back then walk into a world today with
Yeah.
their theological bent in place and deal with the changes that society is dealing with now? So it's kind of one of those things. So what would they say if they were here, like a Dietrich
And you can make
Bonhoeffer
sense of it.
today, talking about social justice today versus when he was in Hitler's time, kind of a thing. So
Right. He might find it a very familiar time.
he might, yeah, but he also offers some insights for what the church did wrong back in its time. So, I'm curious.
Yeah, that would be.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just to say that would be awesome to have that if it were heated.
Yes, it is good. It's kind of fun to go back and forth. So yeah, I got some theologians just kind of sitting around a coffee table. And the funny thing is, they hadn't have coffee shops back then, not the way we have them now. So there's all these devices and things, and so you got some of that going on too. It's like, why so much noise? Yeah. How does this generation think?
Yeah, I look forward to seeing those.
Yeah. I looked at some of the things you've done too, and you started a company selling bomber jackets for dogs. How did you venture into that particular project?
Oh, so I went to see my in-laws with my now ex-wife, wife at the time, and at the end of it, she went back to New York where we were living, and I went to a conference that was nearby. And when I came back from the conference, she greeted me at the airport with a friend for moral support because she also had a 6-week-old border collie puppy. Um, and so we found ourselves eventually breeding border collies in a Manhattan apartment, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
And yeah. But one day I was going for a run in Riverside Park, and she wanted me to take the dog along, which was great. But she wanted me to do some training. So she handed me some liver bits, and I needed bags to pick up after the dog, and I needed keys, to get back into the apartment. And my running shorts didn't have any pockets. And so I was, holding the leash and running out of hands. And so she stuffed the baggies into my socks, which felt really, really awful. And my eruption was, why doesn't the dog carry all this stuff? So she sewed up a little bag to hang from the dog's collar, and called it the jogging bag, and thought she had something because everybody in the park wanted to know where we'd gotten it. So she sewed up a bunch and took them to Macy's and sold them all, and made some more, went to a pet distributor, sold them all. And so, one thing led to another.
Wow. Some of the best ideas come out of necessity, don't they?
Uh-huh.
I love that. So how'd those sales ultimately go?
So the company grew really rapidly. And in fact, it grew too fast. And I didn't even know what that meant. People always say don't grow too fast, but nobody really explains what it means. But it turns out that what's really going on is you need money to make product before you can sell the product and get money back. And over that period of time, the faster you're growing, the more deeply you're drowning. And there's actually, when I found myself drowning, I worked out the mathematical model that clarified what was going on, and it was like, oh yeah, this can't work. And so we were able to do a licensing deal that meant somebody else was doing all the financing of the growth, and we were collecting royalties, and that worked out quite well. When my wife and I went separate ways, it was really just sort of a one-person design operation, and so she retained that, and I went on my way. But
so you got to go invest something else.
Making a lot of money for. It ended up making quite a bit of money for other people.
There you go. Lesson learned, though.
Yeah. Those experiences what you get when you didn't get what you wanted.
Exactly. So. You also developed a system for literacy and secure data storage. Can you explain how those inventions came about?
Yeah. So the literacy thing was I have long wanted to put up sort of a math science education thing on the web, to make it all freely available to everyone, at least everyone that can get to a computer. The sort of thing that Khan ultimately did with Khan Academy was what I'd sort of been trying to build, but never had the combination of time and money at the same time to make that happen. But as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, if I want you to think about calculus this way, then I want you to think about algebra that way. And if I want you to think about algebra that way, I want you to think about arithmetic this way. And it just sort of got kind of more and more fundamental until I was, well, if you can't read, then you can't access any of this. And so my idea was, can I create a system of writing that you can read without knowing how to read? And it turns out that the problem is more subtle than that. What I created was a system of a way of using pictures to represent sounds in a way that you could piece those together to make words. And so you can learn how to read using this very, very quickly. But the subtlety is that for it to work, you have to have the skill of separating words into syllables, which pretty much everybody can do, but then syllables into sounds. And that splitting up into sounds is something that has to be taught. People don't just figure it out on their own. but the people that know it often don't realize they were ever taught it because it's something you learn so quickly.
Right.
And so they don't realize you have to teach it. And so a lot of people flounder unnecessarily. Um, and so it occurred to me that it didn't work the way I wanted it to, but it worked extremely well for developing those skills. And so I've had some really interesting experiences with people, with adults and children, using it and figuring out from it, in a kind of a light bulb moment, how sounds fit together to make words. And then all of a sudden, ordinary writing isn't some mysterious code anymore. It's a rather cumbersome, but nonetheless fairly straightforward way of sequencing sounds to make words.
So where can people find that resource that you've developed?
Let's see. It's not really findable at the moment.
Oh, okay.
I did have a website up, and I do have some resources. And anybody wanting to use the resources, you can contact me. I have a podcast, Now I Get It with Dr. Randy. If you find that, you'll also find links. Let's get in touch. I'll be happy to help anybody that wants to use those resources. I've got a storage space that's full of some card decks and some stamps and games that people can use for that. But I never figured out how to get it into people's hands, and finally decided that basically I need to make some money doing other things first, so that I can do it as a kind of charitable thing rather than trying to make it a business.
That's cool. So what are you working on now that's profitable for you?
So I'm writing some books that I think actually people will find quite interesting. One of them is about a discovery that I rather painfully made. You may have heard of 5 love languages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gary Chapman. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I say that there are 8. And the reason there are 8 is because there are 8 cognitive functions. Whenever we process information, we have to first ask, is it? And our sensing gives us that information. And then we need to know, what is it? And that's where our thinking comes in. And then we need to decide, what is it worth? What's its value to us? And that's where feeling comes in. And then finally, what does it mean? Which is what intuition is all about. And each of those 4 things we can do with our senses focused on the outward world, or we can use internally focused on our memories and our internal sensations. And so that gives us 8. And the trouble is we never live long enough to maturely develop all 8. We at best get to 4 of them over the course of a lifetime. And so for most of our life, we're really only good at a couple of them. And so that's what essentially determines our personality. And based on which one of those functions is the one that we're really good at and really kind of value and focus on, that determines what we'll notice. And we tend to be oblivious to everything else. So I'll tell you the personal experience that spawned this investigation for me. I had a relationship that I really valued at the time that was falling apart. And I read the 5 Love Languages book and thought I'd give it a try. So I decided, I didn't know what her love language was. I wasn't able to figure it out from reading the book. But I decided, look, I'm just going to do 5 things every day. And so every day I came up with 5 different, one from each category, things to see what would happen. And after a few days, I got curious and I asked her about her experience. Mistake. It hadn't been long enough to really have an impact. But she did launch into a criticism of my feeble efforts.
The other 12, she hadn't even noticed. It's like they hadn't even happened at all. And the thing that struck me is that those 3 that she did notice were all of the same type. But more than that, they all dovetailed perfectly with her dominant cognitive function.
Interesting.
And that's when the light bulb went off. So I started talking with people and exploring. I knew enough about personality to be able to identify personality types. And I talked with them about, because a lot of people were interested in those 5 love languages, and talked to them about what their love languages were. And this pattern just recurred over and over and over and over and over. repeatedly. And so that's kind of where it all began.
Oh my goodness. So you said there's 8 love languages. So you're working on those 8 now. How does that, because you mentioned earlier that we never will in our lifetime get all 8. So how do we use what we have now to identify which ones we've tapped into, and how do we use that to improve our relationships?
Okay, so it turns out that people actually show you by the way they gesture and the way they talk what their specific cognitive function use maps out to. So there are 4 different ways of walking and 4 different ways of gesturing. One of the walks is really reminiscent of a charging bull. This is somebody that is walking energetically straight ahead, looking straight ahead, their head lowered like they have horns, and just a very focused walk. And that's an interaction style that Linda Behrens calls in charge. And again, it's like a charging bull. And it's pretty much every action figure in every action movie has that kind of walk.
Sure.
Then there's a glide, which a good example of that is in the very first episode of the first season of Game of Thrones. There's a scene where Lady Stark is walking through the castle grounds to find her husband. And it looks like she's on, I call them flatellators, those escalators that are flat, like at airports, the people movers.
Yes.
She looks like she's just on one of those. She's gliding, that kind of smoothly floating across the surface of the castle. And that kind of glide is characteristic of an interaction style that Linda Behrens calls chart the course. On the other hand, there's kind of a stroll way of styling, way of walking. Think of, say, Ricky Gervais in The Invention of Lying. In this sort of walk, there's a curiosity where, they're not sort of solely focused on straight ahead like those other 2 I described. They're looking around. They're taking everything in. They're kind of relaxed and friendly. And then there's the bounce, which think of Tigger.
Okay.
Or think of Dick Van Dyke as Bertie in Mary Poppins. It's that spring in the step. It's that making eye contact with everyone, engaging everyone, smiling at everyone, really focused on the people, much more than a specific task or goal, or on everything, on the other hand.
Sure. And
this is the type that Linda Behrens calls get things going. And so the first step is to kind of figure out which of these styles is characteristic of the person that I'm focusing on. Now, everyone has all, so it's really more kind of what's your habitual state, because everyone can do all of these things. All of us have all 8 of the cognitive functions, but there's a difference in maturity and skill. And so that's 4. And then there's another 4, which has to do with the way people gesture. And one really common style of gesturing is to use your hands like they're a cleaver, or like you're holding reins, riding a horse.
Right.
And that style of gesture is one you find in people who are really focused on logistics, who really value security, who tend to be focused on tradition, and are really good at sort of stabilizing things. Then another, not quite as common, but also very common, is where the fingers being used like they're poking or pecking. And that style is typical of people who are improvisers, who are more focused on sensation, more focused on the here and now, and Kiersey calls them artisans. They're your classic rock star musician is kind of that type.
Sure.
And then there are a couple of more rare types. If you've ever watched Bernie Sanders gesture, it's like his hands are wings or fins, and that's characteristic of idealists, catalysts, the sort of people who are good at diplomacy and bringing people together, and are really into identity, want to be authentic. And then a fourth style that also is much less common is you'll see the hand used like a claw. And I actually would have given you a really good example of that myself if the camera were still on,
right?
Because that's kind of my temperament, and that's characteristic of the knowledge seeker, a sort of person who's focused on strategy and has a kind of timeless orientation of almost as though time doesn't exist, past, present, future, constantly before me is one of the quotes there. And so by watching for these four different styles of gestures, you can also figure out what their temperament is. And the combination of the two, temperament and interaction style, determines which of these 8 cognitive functions you tend to use the most and rely on the most and trust the most. And there's also another one that you use as your so-called gesture. And that's also important for love, because it's kind of is sitting back going, what's wrong with this picture? It like the jester in a court that could tell the king the truth where nobody else could. The jester is the one that's always second guessing everything for you. So you need to both feel loved in your most dominant sense, but you also need to not feel unloved for the gesture function. And there is a way of mapping these out. It's slightly complicated to describe, but one thing you can do is, once you're aware that all 8 of these exist, and start thinking about what each of these 8 things needs, you can do the same experiment that I was trying, where you just throw into your mix of actions, each of those 8, on a kind of a rotating basis, and then you'll see which ones they're responding to. And then you'll have, in addition, a great deal of insight into, kind of what makes them tick and what things for them are natural and what things are hard for them.
That's fascinating. So how are you getting this information out, or how are you helping people to discover that? Do you have a website or a book that you've developed to do that?
Well, I'm in the process of editing. I have a first draft, but I still have some work ahead of me on a book for it, which I hope to have available soon. I did have some things up on a website, but it's currently not up. Hopefully before too long, I'll be able to get that back up. And I'm also putting together a course, which people can take online, that will, walk you through all the things that you need to understand to be able to use this. And the initial version, I'm focusing on, sort of intimate relationships, but it's really every relationship. So if it's your kid that you want to be sure that they feel loved, then there's a version for that. If you're a manager and you want to, people don't leave companies, they leave their managers. And so
right.
Having that relationship, be a strong one and a valued one, is really key. And managers tend to have one particular personality style that is often very different from the people who are working for them. And there can be a real disconnect in terms of people being able to feel valued and appreciated. But the same thing is true if you're a salesman and are trying to provide a service or a product to somebody. Building that rapport is a critical part of that process too. And even within teams. So life life is permeated with relationships, and having those relationships be strong and valued is kind of key to everything we do. So
cool. So what's your working title for this?
My first working title was Making Love and Feeling It. But the feedback I got was that it made it sound too much like a sex manual.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's true. I was thinking, is that what you really mean by that?
Where I thought I was just being clever, it was turning people off. So that's not the working title anymore.
Probably a good thing.
Then I was thinking love quotients, and I may still use some variation on that, but I'm also kind of leaning towards the metaphor of frequencies or wavelengths, because what's really happening is if you're sending your love on one frequency and it's not the frequency they're tuned in on, they're not getting it. They're not feeling loved. And if you love someone, if you value someone, if you care about someone, if you want a strong relationship with someone, you want them to be able to feel the ways that you're showing your care. And so, knowing about the frequencies and being able to frequency switch in ways that people need to feel loved or to not feel unloved is something I think we all want to be able to do and know how to do.
Yeah, that's good. I love that. So you also have a podcast. I want to get you to talk a little bit about that as we kind of wrap things up. Tell us about your podcast.
Okay. So the podcast is called Now I Get It with Dr. Andy. And what kind of prompted me to put it together is I did want for there to be a place where people could learn about some of this, love frequency stuff. So I thought, well, a podcast, I can do that. And so I actually have in several episodes talked about various facets of this. And but then I also I have another book that is about how Newton came up with his discoveries. And I have another book which is kind of a grand unified theory of mathematics. It's describes how one simple idea, as you explore the idea in a very systematic way, all of the various branches of mathematics split off as kind of subtasks in the study of this one thing. And so it's something I find very beautiful and fascinating. And so I was thinking, well, I'd kind of like to do a podcast about those things too. And what I did this podcast accelerator training thing, and they convinced me that there are people out there who have the same kind of far-ranging intellectual curiosity that I do, and that I should just bring into it all the things that I find interesting. And so that's kind of what I've done. I did one episode where I explained kind of how crypto works, and another one where I kind of explained how the geometry of events creates our universe, and so on. So just kind of things that I've thought of or encountered over the years that I think are kind of really fascinating thoughts. I'm talking about there.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I have to check out your Now I Get It with Dr. Andy podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I hope you enjoy it.
I will. So, Andy, as we kind of wrap things up, I'd love to ask my guests this question. You have had an interesting career and you are so passionate about so many things. Well, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, what I hope it ultimately is I have some ideas for how to sustainably get carbon out of the atmosphere, and what to kind of do with it in a way that again will scale and sustain itself. And so I'm exploring that as well. And if I can make that happen, then it's kind of hard to imagine anything I could come up with that would that would be ultimately more important than that.
Right.
But the the love frequency stuff, I think can be absolutely transformative for very many people who are unnecessarily miserable. they are sort of dying of a thirst for love in an ocean of love that's being expressed that they're not feeling.
Right.
And that I think is a serious tragedy. If I can ultimately figure out a way to get the literacy stuff into the people's hands that need it and could use it, that's another kind of big source of misery, throughout the world. And the mathematical stuff I just find fun. So if there are a few people that that find that interesting and fascinating, and aesthetically delightful, I'd love for that to be the case too. But once I'm dead, people are, of course, welcome to gather from my life whatever value they can. Some will gather a cautionary tale from it,
Right.
and that's fine too.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thanks so much for sharing. Where can people connect with you? I know your website is in flux again, but where can they find you and follow you?
Yeah, so winklers.us is the website. When it does show up, the links will also appear on the podcast. So that's a good place to start looking for me. Now I get it with Dr. Andy, and then that'll get you to the website when I've got it up.
Well, Andy, thanks so much.
I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Facebook, so you can find me there as well.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Blessings on the work you do. It sounds like you got some good projects there working, and hopefully you and I can finish our books and get them out there for the world to read.
from your lips to God's ears.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
It was, Andy. Thank you. You're welcome on any time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trailblazers and Titans. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the insights shared, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you the stories of the world's most inspiring leaders. Don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and exclusive content. Join our community of Trailblazers and Titans, and let's continue to learn, grow, and transform our visions into reality together. Until next time, keep blazing your trail and striving for greatness.